Preparing reference mixes for Sibelius, preparing Pro Tools for Sibelius, and send to Sibelius from Pro Tools. Before we start, I suggest doing a Save As. File, Save As, title of your song, for Sibelius. Next, let's organize our tracks for this lead sheet. The only MIDI parts that we're going to need are the vocal melody, let's move that to the top, and our bass line. Let's move that underneath. I suggest printing necessary MIDI instrument, virtual instrument tracks to audio inside of your session, your song that you've created. I have bounced my tracks into stems with vocal, bass, guitar, kick, snare, kit, and backing music. This should give me plenty of options for a reference mix for Sibelius. Why it's a good idea to do this is that having more MIDI tracks than the necessary ones that we need, vocal and bass, will get confusing later on and inside of Sibelius. So bounce these tracks to audio and then delete them in your Save As session. My session here has been streamlined with only submix prints. Since we are not concerned with final mixes, just reference mixes for playback inside of Sibelius, this helps keep the session clean and easy to manage. Now what we're going to need to work in Sibelius is reference mixes. We are going to need a full mix with all these parts bounced down. Then we're going to need a mix minus our lead vocal and our bass line. First, I suggest bringing in a master fader track. Let's move this to the top. Insert, and we're going to use just a basic compressor limiter from Digi. Let's start with a preset. We'll start with gentle limiting. Let's turn the gain off. Threshold up to -3. We can type that in. Find the loudest part of your song. Mine happens to be the chorus end. Play that. Bring your master fader down so your loudest part of your song does not clip. Option C clears any clipping indicators that you might find. There we go. That should work fine. Now as a reminder, how do we bounce? File, bounce to, disk. What we need is a stereo interleaved 16-bit 44.1 kHz WAV file. Bounce, label this appropriately. I would suggest this one being minus the vocal and bass, saying I'm coming home minus Vox bass. Also do a bounce of the whole entire mix. I suggest this in case you need to do some tweaking inside of Sibelius and you need to hear your vocal parts. Once again, WAV file, stereo interleaved, 16-bit 44.1. Name it appropriately and save it in a place that you can find. I prefer adding my key signatures, chord changes, and markers in the DAW that I'm mixing and tracking with. This works well with Pro Tools because all of this except for the markers will transfer into Sibelius. So all your hard work here is not lost. If you prefer doing this in Sibelius, that's fine too. A tempo is a good idea to have. You probably have that with your song already. Meter, that will be brought over to Sibelius. Key signatures, that would be brought over. As a reminder how to add or remove these, get your cursor where you want one. Hit the plus, add a key signature. Holding Option and clicking will delete. Chords, get your cursor where you want your chord. Hit the plus sign, add a chord, Option, click to delete. Now let's take a look and see what our score will look like in Sibelius. We can do that inside of Pro Tools. Pro Tools actually has the Sibelius engine built into it. Although it's a very, very basic version, we can get a good idea of what our lead sheet will look like. Go to Window, Score Editor, and up pops the Score Editor window. You may or may not see anything when you first bring this up. This is because to our left, our tracks list, we have nothing selected. I will now select the vocal melody and now the bass. A few last things to do in here before we actually send this to Sibelius. Go to File, Score Setup, enter the title of your song. And the composer. One last thing to remember, and very important before sending this to Sibelius, is uncheck chord diagrams. These are guitar chord diagrams. We do not need those for this lead sheet. It's much easier to remove them here than it is in Sibelius. So make sure this is unchecked. Close this window, and one last easy step is File, Send to Sibelius. We'll get a window that says Update Score. Check all of these boxes here. These two are uncheckable. And there you go. We are now inside Sibelius. The next lesson will take you through preparing your lead sheet in Sibelius.